Okay, I'm Matt Fleckenstein. I'm the Senior Director at Microsoft in our Mixed Reality Group, and I'm here to cover the Ask the Expert session where you can learn about how Lockheed Martin is advancing spaceflight with HoloLens and mixed reality. Sorry about the technical issues. Of course, I am having big problems with our mute button on this session, but we're going to talk all about how we can leverage the power of technology to send astronauts to the moon and beyond the moon. So we're not going to mess around with things like mute buttons. But before we begin, I really wanted to kind of just walk through a few logistics so we can talk about how to engage with the experts. First, use the chat session area to ask your questions. We encourage active participation, so jot your questions down in there. They'll appear to all of us as attendees, and then once approved by a moderator, you'll be able to kind of see them, and you'll be able to kind of upvote your favorite questions. So we want to make sure that the most popular questions we definitely get to in person. So feel free to kind of ask questions. Also encourage you to be active with that thumbs up button so you can upvote questions as well. Experts will answer the questions verbally. We'll answer them verbally over chat. Picking out, I'll select the ones that we're going to handle verbally and answer the rest as the session goes. And we'll also provide some resources to learn more at the conclusion of the session. In terms of just proper etiquette, know that this session is going to be recorded. And help our moderators. We would ask that we make this collectively a great session. So no spamming or posting inappropriate comments in the chat. And it's important, of course, that we adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. So I will give you exactly 3 seconds to read this all. I'm sure you've taken it all in, but I think you know the gist of this, right? Let's make this a productive session together. Before we jump in, just a little bit of context as kind of what we're talking about. You may have seen earlier the digital breakout session that talked about how Lockheed Martin is leveraging mixed reality and HoloLens, right, to really take folks to the moon and astronauts to the moon and beyond. This is really kind of a joint initiative between Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, and one of our mixed reality partners, a company called Scope AR. You may have also heard mention of this in Satya's keynote, if you had a chance to watch his keynote, where he covered some of the exciting stuff that's happening here as well. And so kind of with that, we're going to kind of, just jump right into it, introduce the team a little bit, and then start taking some questions. So as I said, I'm the guy in the upper left-hand corner there, Matt, and maybe to kind of kick things off and with introductions, I'll ask Shelley if she would go ahead and introduce herself. Shelley from Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shelley Peterson from Lockheed Martin. I'm Principal Investigator of Augmented and Mixed Reality.
Awesome. And how about Scott Montgomery? Would you mind introducing yourself as well? Here's what we'll do while we're actually waiting for Scott. I'll go ahead and introduce him. So Scott Montgomery, founder and CEO of Scope AR. Scope AR, like I said, is one of our mixed reality partner companies out there. And we'll talk a lot about their WorkLink solution, which Lockheed Martin's been leveraging for their space program. Charlie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Charlie Han. I think I nailed the mute button. I'm the product lead in the engineering team for the HoloLens project.
And look, just in the interest of time, because I see questions are starting to flow in already, I'm going to kind of just do a global introduction of kind of the folks on this bottom list. We've got a nice mix of folks from Microsoft who really, I think, can answer just about any questions that you may have. We've got a combination of kind of engineers and program managers, so feel free to kind of send us any questions. If you saw the session earlier, you saw Satya to talk about it, you're familiar with the work we're doing here with Lockheed Martin, feel free to ask us questions. And as those questions, if we turn a bunch of those, and you have other more broad questions just about mixed reality and deploying mixed reality in the enterprise, feel free to ask those questions as well. So as we said, kind of there's a number of resources that are available for you to follow up and to kind of learn more from this session. I'll just leave this up on the screen as we kind of start to field questions. But maybe to begin with, let's start with this question. Shelley, this question is oriented toward you. I see that someone was interested in terms of how at Lockheed Martin you got started with mixed reality and HoloLens in general. Like, can you go back and share some of that story? So
back in the early days, I had worked with special ops with with a monocular. And that turned into a business development pursuit with Lockheed Martin looking at augmented and mixed reality. And then back in 2016, we had piloted the HoloLens, and we were very impressed with the potential for mixed reality, for having content overlaid within the environment. We could see how that mapped nicely to the manufacturing environment. And so we started to quantify and measure what that would mean for the technicians and to determine why it was saving money. Look at how it's removing the need for interpretation. So in 2017, in the fall of 2017, we ran our first activity out on the shop floor, and it confirmed what we had suspected, that it would provide significant value within the activities on the shop floor.
That's great. So I know kind of relatively early on, you got engaged with the folks at Scope AR. I hear there's a question here that's kind of, hey, tell us a little bit more about Scope AR and what they do. And so I'm going to kick it over to Scott and have him talk a little bit about the company and what they do. And then maybe I'll bring it back to you, Shelley, to talk a little bit about how you started working with them and how that engagement started. So Scott, do you want to kind of share a little bit about Scope AR and kind of give maybe the quick elevator pitch on who you are and what Scope AR does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been experimenting with augmented and mixed reality for a long time. We actually built the first prototype back in like 2011. And we actually built a pair of glasses back then. And we were extremely excited when the HoloLens came out because that had kind of realized the vision of what that initial prototype of glasses was meant to be. So in 2015, we launched the first augmented reality application for collaboration. So similar to Microsoft Remote Assist, and we've got a product called WorkLink that does something similar. And then we've got an authoring platform that makes it very easy to use CAD models to create instructions for training or manufacturing assembly instructions, like what Shelley's doing, or even field service maintenance instructions. So really, the specialty is allowing us or very easy content creation to create those procedures extremely rapidly, pushing them up to the device, and then being able to load them up in a collaborative session to remote troubleshoot or walk through a procedure, do remote training, that type of thing. But yeah, I've been a proud partner with Microsoft pretty much since day one when the HoloLens launched.
Got it. So look, I'm still awestruck a little bit by the fact that you built a prototype of glasses back in 2011. So you'll see down in the bottom right-hand corner the Twitter handle for @HoloLens. If you actually go out there and you basically respond to join and follow that Twitter handle and basically respond something about kind of this particular session that you were in the Ask the Expert session with Lockheed Martin, I will follow up with Scott and we will dig up a picture of kind of that first prototype of those glasses, and we'll make sure that we get it out to you because that's fascinating to me. You did talk a little bit about your content creation tools, and I know that's an area where you've spent a lot of time investing in. I see a couple of questions that are related to creating content for these types of task guidance types of applications. I know the other day when I was talking with Shelley, you mentioned, Shelley, that in many cases, to bring kind of up a new set of tasks for a given, to help somebody, a new set of instructions for a given task, it typically takes around 15 to 30 minutes for the typical one of these. Can you talk a little bit more maybe about kind of what's involved in that and how, kind of that has evolved? Because I know it's an area where content creation has gotten easier over time.
Sure. I mean, I think I met Scott, let's see, Scott, what was it, 2015?
I think it was 2015, yep.
Before that time frame, even 10, 15 years ago, we could build some fantastic augmented reality type content, but it could take, a PhD in computer science a couple of months to build the content. And we knew it would be powerful, but we needed to be able to build it quickly. We needed the return on investment. And what we're really impressed with the Scope AR products is that it allowed us to build that content quickly. We see it as having two end users. We see the technicians who are wearing the device and using the device, or the engineers, but then it's also for the people who are building the content. We need that to be a streamlined process as well. So we found that for most of the activities that we're running with position alignment, It takes about 15 minutes now to build that content. We already have the models created, and we can move very seamlessly over to having those ready. And we've been tested on that. We have groups reaching out, asking us to help on a very short timeline. And they're pretty thrilled when we can go over within the hour and support.
That's awesome. That sounds amazing. I talked a little bit about asked a little bit about how the content creation has evolved. Talk, Shelly, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit about how, the first use case maybe that you used mixed reality and HoloLens for, and then maybe how that's evolved over time to where you are today.
The first activity was it was a running torque application. You may have seen the picture out there. It's a running torque where we show the order of the fasteners and then additional data that goes along with that process. For that one, we saw about a 50% touch labor reduction. When we had assessed it, we noticed that it would take the technicians about half of the time in the traditional methods to work through the documentation, the drawings, to figure out the process, and then half of the time doing the work. And we took out all of that first half of the time figuring it out. So it was right at a 50% reduction. That was a standalone activity. We weren't connected to any systems at that time. Now we are, and now we have many additional features where we can buy off steps through the device. We can capture picture and video through the device. We can capture text data, torque values, other content through the device. It's really matured nicely for our environments. We've expanded into many other use cases, of course, but that was the first one.
Got it. Yeah, that's it's great. So you mentioned kind of 50% kind of touch labor savings, right? Talk a little bit about kind of what you typically see as you deploy this in terms of what are you seeing in terms of saving on touch labor? What other areas are you seeing kind of ROI or benefit from using it?
Sure. So we use it for knowing where to place objects on the spacecraft. We have a large number of fasteners, click bonds, strain gauges, heaters, and thermistors. There's a lot of Velcro and tape on spacecraft. So, for example, with click bonds, we can put on the device. It shows where the click bonds are to be placed. We're marking those as fast as the person can. They use looks like a sticker. It's a tape masking that is used for surface prep. And they can mark those just as fast as they can pull those off the page. Normally, what would take 2 to 3 technicians working 2 to 3 shifts. When we use mixed reality, the WorkLink platform, we can complete that with 1 technician in 2.5 hours. An 8-hour activity is 45 minutes. So it's right at 93 to 95% touch labor reduction on those activities. Another interesting element that we noticed within the last year was that since we started back in 2017, since that time frame working at multiple sites on multiple programs, we haven't had any errors, which is significant. We know why. It's just so clear. We're removing the need for interpretation. So it's definitely an area that we think has fantastic potential as well as a risk mitigation tool.
Awesome. That sounds great. Hey, look, here's a question. You were talking about kind of, basically setting it up so that you could, mark physical content, right? And then, apply fasteners and whatnot. We announced a new product at, Microsoft at Ignite this week, right? That was a new mixed reality service that we have called Object Anchors. And there's a question here wanting us to talk a little bit more about that, and a question as to, how that's being used by Scope AR and our other partners. So I don't know, Charlie, if you want to maybe kind of take the first one and give a quick overview of Object Anchors, and then I'm happy to kind of put it over to Kevin to talk a little bit about how a variety of our different partners are taking advantage of those services. So do you want to just go ahead, Charlie, and give a little overview of the service?
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of background on object anchors. We had heard from a lot of customers and partners that at the end of the day, when they're taking action on a particular task on the manufacturing line, they're actually working on an object, right? Or they're working on some asset. In order for us to be able to really accurately align holographic digital assets to that object, we wanted something that was fast, that was easy, and was pretty foolproof in terms of actually aligning it in a pose-accurate way. And so what we created was the new service called Azure Object Anchors that allows you as a customer to take an existing CAD model or 3D format, upload it to our cloud service that we then generate a tracking model that can recognize, lock, and then stabilize any sort of holographic asset on the object that you care about. And what that means is that you don't have to go and do precision alignment manually. You don't have to attach QR codes. You don't have to do any of that pre-set up work. We just automatically detect that object and we snap that content there for you so that you can be guided to look in the right place, to work in the right places seamlessly.
Actually, so there was another question that just came in as you were talking, right? That I'll tee up, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the ways that folks are using this. But basically, the question is, how would one share the anchor points between different clients, so that you could basically create a larger tracking volume through SLAM. So in this case, right, they used an external tracker to connect anchor points in the HoloLens to track, a hunter jumper, right, in the equestrian. So, could you talk a little bit more about how you would do that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's probably for me. So one of our services that we actually announced last year called Azure Spatial Anchors is actually really designed to really tackle this problem. With any sort of end device, end client device, you're going to have limited compute, limited memory to be able to basically generate a very, very large tracking map. Azure Spatial Anchors allows us to do that with the power of the cloud, with Azure. And so what happens is that all of these disparate endpoints can actually go feed their particular poses, their particular anchors up into this cloud service so that we can generate a much larger global map. So like in this particular case, it sounds like maybe you're on an equestrian course of some sort. Well, the ability for us with multiple different devices to be able to generate that map together, and then for subsequent devices to be able to enter that space without needing to remap that. You can go and tap into this Azure Spatial Anchor service. We will actually go provide and provide you the links to those actual anchors, and then all of those HoloLenses, as well as mobile devices that support AR Core and AR Kit, can participate in that same map. The second part of that question I see was, hey, how can we use this to go further refine the actual accuracy? Well, again, the compute that is on the edge in HoloLens, we built a holographic processing unit to process these things in real time with high levels of precision, but ultimately that can't compete with the power of the cloud. And so this is another one of those things where we have the opportunity with time, with that compute power, to refine those anchors and those poses so that we can over time generate a more precise map as well. So the combination of larger map, more precise map shared across devices is really the promise of Azure Spatial Anchors.
That's great. So we talked about Azure Spatial Anchors in terms of being able to anchor holographic content to specific locations, right, in spaces, recall them, enable sharing, that type of stuff. The new Azure Object Anchor service in terms of attaching holographic content to physical objects. Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit? I know you spend a lot of time dealing with partners like Scope AR and other partners of ours. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're seeing them use some of these services?
Yeah, so in particular with the AOA service in private preview, there's been two types of classifications. I won't discuss the customers in particular, but one is in training, medical training, where they'll have a mannequin that's there, and it's very important to place holographically the internals of the anatomy, like the internals, so that they can test on if they're doing I'm trying to think what's the instrument that you use on you put gel on your body and you move it back and forth.
Yeah, if they're doing like an MRI image, right?
it's like when when your wife's pregnant and you have a kid, they do the scan. It's called
An ultrasound.
ultrasound. Thank you. So to get people like trained for ultrasounds, they'll use mannequins, and you need to see what's inside the body to train. Well, to do that, you would typically use a QR code. But in this instance, that's a very difficult thing to do because the mannequin is on a table and the QR code is on the edge of the table. But if the mannequin moves, then you just lost your alignment. So there's this constant flow back and forth. So using AOA, we just get the model of the mannequin and we place that, and once HoloLens sees it, regardless of where you place that mannequin, you get the alignment. So that saves the hospitals and universities that are doing training an immense amount of time. Another example is if you're like in automotive and you're doing a design review on a vehicle. Well, if you're doing a design review, you can't just like place a QR code on the vehicle because it always has to be precisely aligned to something. So, tricks that we would do before that is we would use like poster tracking and use the license plate to do tracking so that you can align holograms to the physical asset of that vehicle. But that's also, troublesome in that if something moves, then your whole alignment goes off and you have to readjust. Well, since automotive typically they always have CAD/CAM, we can use that CAD/CAM and process it through AOA, and then get immediate alignment to that vehicle, and go around the vehicle and have all the holograms aligned perfectly. So those are two real-world use case scenarios that we've worked with partners and customers on with AOA, and it's the time savings that you have, not so much as a developer, but for your end user customers, is immense.
Right. So for those of you, the insider baseball there is AOA is our Azure Object Anchors. Just want to make sure folks kind of got that point of it. Would encourage you to check it out. Just went into private preview. Like I said, brand new service. Hey, Scott, I'm gonna tee up this question for you, right? Which is, hey, you started talking a little bit about you got started in 2011. We've talked a little bit about the evolution of this, but I think Kevin and Charlie just hit on an important fact, right? We're now starting to get to the point where we're starting to see the hardware interacting with, and kind of you leveraging compute at the edge, as well as kind of the power of the cloud and how those two things can work together. Talk a little bit about how those two worlds coming together is really enabling kind of the next generation experiences and enabling, partners such as Scope AR to really advance what it is they're taking to market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the device or the evolution of head-worn devices it's taken a while. Honestly, it's taken a lot longer than I thought it would. And part of the reason for that is you have a whole bunch of competing factors. You want a really big field of view, but that takes a larger projector, which takes a larger battery. But you also want it to be a nice, comfortable device, which means you want a smaller battery to be less heavy. So part of the strain on the batteries is the compute power, and so by offloading a lot of the compute to the cloud via cloud rendering or some of these services with object recognition, that enables the device to first of all have a much better experience. Your battery is going to last longer because you're not using as much compute on there. The power of the cloud is essentially unlimited, and scales obviously extremely nicely. So the pace of innovation with these type of edge compute use cases is just going to be it's going to be amazing compared to trying to optimize it down to the chip level on the actual device. That's really painful to do, very slow iterations. So this is just going to accelerate innovation. Very excited for these advances.
Awesome. Hey, Shelly, I see a question that I'll direct over to you. It's a little bit about what has been the experience for the engineers and the assemblers and manufacturers at Lockheed Martin with mixed reality, right? How did they first react when you introduced this? What do they think of it now? Kind of how has it impacted their day-to-day lives and jobs?
It's a lot of fun to watch. So when they put on the device for the first time, we always get they're fascinated, and then when they realize that you can give voice commands, you can give gestures, it's a lot of fun to see their reactions. You know, I can tell story after story of technicians who refuse to go on lunch break because they're just having so much fun. A 3-week activity that somehow magically gets done in 2 weeks because they just didn't want to go home. You know, there's lots of different scenarios like that I can speak to. We've had technicians who were near retirement, who were planning to change their retirement date so that they could stay and use the technology on the shop floor when we were first deploying it to that site. You know, it's quite the positive response. What we find is that it makes their job easier in a way. It's more hands-on time instead of time figuring out drawings and 2D data. So that's the part I think that they really enjoy is the manufacturing, you know, the hands-on process. And with mixed reality, they get to do much more of that.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. That's, I think, similar to kind of how we see it broadly, right? A lot of people talk about how this has freed them up to actually do the job the way, you know, kind of that they were hired to do, right? Whether it's an engineer, for example, somebody at Lockheed assembling Orion spacecraft, or whether it's a nurse actually using it for patient healthcare, right? It really lets them focus on kind of why they got into what they did in the first place. So that's great. I know firsthand what Shelley is talking about. There's a line that is in the video that we kind of created with them where she refers to mixed reality in general as magic. And, you know, it kind of has that feeling. We all smile as we watch somebody put on a device like a HoloLens for the very first time, because it takes about 15, 20, 30 seconds, and the person inevitably gets this big childlike grin on their face because they're experiencing this thing for the first time that honestly many of us never could have imagined. So look, we're at about time. I want to thank everyone for the great questions. I want to thank certainly Shelley, Scott, the folks at Microsoft on my team here who joined us. Thank you so much for joining us. Would encourage you to check out the digital breakout session. If you haven't checked it out, it's still going to run 2 more times, once later this evening and then once tomorrow as well. So thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it and hope that you enjoy the rest of Ignite.